So picture this. You're in the middle of nowhere, just a vast icy expanse in the Arctic. And that's where our story kicks off, with these really ambitious words from a sea captain, Robert Walton. He's sailing towards what he thinks is going to be glory, discovery, eternal light.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into Mary Shelley's incredible novel, Frankenstein. And trust me, this story is so much more tragic and way more complicated than the monster movies you've probably seen. All right, so we're on the ship with Captain Walton, headed for the North Pole. But suddenly, everything grinds to a halt. They're completely trapped by these huge sheets of ice. And then, out of the blue, he and his crew see something that's, well, it's just impossible. This gigantic figure on a dog sled just racing across the frozen wasteland. And if that wasn't weird enough, the very next day, they find another guy, this time adrift on a piece of ice, barely even alive. He's obviously not from around there, so they ask him, what on earth are you doing out here? And his answer is just chilling. He's chasing that giant figure they saw. Now this stranger, he looks at Captain Walton and he sees that same fire, that same burning ambition for discovery. And he basically says, whoa, hold on, you remind me of myself. He offers a warning, a story so terrible it will cure Walton of his ambition. This stranger's name is Victor Frankenstein. And his story, it doesn't start in the ice and snow. It starts with a warm, happy childhood back in Geneva.
Victor isn't just smart, he's a genius, a truly passionate young scientist. He heads off to the University of Ingolstadt, and there he gets completely consumed by one single powerful idea, an idea that's going to ruin everything. He wants to cheat death itself.
I mean, on the surface, his dream sounds pretty noble, right? He wants to pioneer a new way, help mankind, but the way he goes about it, the process he undertakes to achieve this goal, it was anything but noble.
For almost 2 years, this becomes his entire world. He totally isolates himself, stops talking to his family, his health just falls apart. He's a recluse, completely haunted by this obsession. And where does he get his materials? He's scavenging through graveyards, dissecting rooms. The line between brilliant scientist and, well, a pretty disturbed madman gets really, really blurry. And then, one dreary November night, he does it. He brings his creation to life. But the second that creature's dull, yellow eye opens, Victor's dream instantly shatters. The being he had designed to be beautiful is absolutely horrifying. And what does he do? He's filled with terror and disgust, and he just runs. He abandons his creation, basically a newborn, leaving it all alone in a world that's never going to understand it.
So Victor eventually comes back to his apartment, and the creature? It's gone. The shock of it all sends him into this horrible sickness of brain fever. Luckily, his childhood friend Henry Clerval shows up and nurses him back to health. But Victor doesn't say a word about what he's done. He tries to just forget the whole thing to get back to his old life. But then he gets a letter from home with the worst possible news. His youngest brother, William, has been murdered. As Victor is rushing home to Geneva, there's a storm, and in a flash of lightning, he sees him. He sees his creation near the crime scene. And in that split second, he knows who the real killer is. He's just crippled with guilt, but how can he tell anyone the truth? He runs off into the mountains to be alone, and that's where he's confronted by the very being he created and abandoned. Okay, and this part right here, this is a total game changer for the whole story. The creature, who Victor only sees as this evil monster, he starts to speak. And it's not grunts or growls. He's articulate, he's intelligent, he's emotional, and he makes a demand. Listen to my side of the story before you judge me.
So the creature lays it all out. He describes waking up totally confused and scared, like a newborn. He finds this little shed attached to a cottage, and from there he secretly watches this poor but incredibly loving family. And just by watching them, he learns everything. He learns to speak, to read, he learns about history and all the complicated human feelings. He learns about love and family, all the things he wants so badly, but can never, ever have. And this is his whole point right here. He's basically saying, I wasn't born evil. He insists that he started out good, that he wanted to connect with people. But it was the constant rejection, the pure horror he saw on every single face that looked at him, that's what twisted his loneliness into pure rage.
His isolation just becomes this unbearable pain. So he comes up with a plan. He's got this one shot to connect with someone. He decides to approach the old man of the family, who's blind, hoping the man will hear his kind words before anyone can see his terrifying face. But just as he's talking to him, the kids come back, and they freak out. They beat him and chase him away. And that's the final straw. And that's it. Something inside him just snaps. He declares war on all of humanity, but especially on his creator, Victor. He even admits to killing William. It wasn't random, it was a fit of rage after the little boy shouted that his last name was Frankenstein. His violence, he says, comes directly from his despair. And so he comes to Victor, not just for revenge, but with a proposal.
He's not asking for the world. He knows Victor could never love him. All he wants is a companion, a female, made just like him, just as hideous, so that he won't have to be alone anymore. And he makes a promise. You do this one thing for me, and we will disappear into the jungles of South America. You'll never hear from us again. So Victor's in a tough spot, torn between feeling sorry for the creature and being totally horrified. He reluctantly agrees. He goes to this remote island in Scotland to start his awful work all over again. But as he's building the second creature, his mind just starts racing with these terrible doubts. What if she's even more evil than the first one? What if they hate each other? Or, and this is the big one, what if they have kids and create a whole new race of monsters that could wipe out humanity? He's almost there, almost finished, and then he looks up. And through the window, he sees the creature, watching him, with this awful grin on his face. In a moment of pure panic and disgust, Victor just tears the female creature to pieces right in front of him. Well, that's the point of no return. The creature's one last hope for any kind of happiness is destroyed, and all that's left is a promise of absolute, unending revenge. And the creature makes good on his promise. Oh, does he ever. He becomes this dark shadow that follows Victor everywhere, just systematically destroying every single person he loves. First, his best friend Henry Clerval is murdered. Then, the most tragic part. On Victor's wedding night, he hears the threat and thinks the creature is coming for him, so he leaves his new wife Elizabeth alone for just a moment, and that's when the creature strikes, killing her right there in their wedding bed.
At this point, Victor has nothing left. He's lost his brother, his best friend, his wife, even his father dies from grief. His life now has one and only one purpose: hunt down and destroy the being that he unleashed on the world. And this epic chase, it takes them across continents, and finally, right into the frozen, empty heart of the Arctic.
And that's how we end up right back where we started, on Captain Walton's ship. Victor's body finally gives out, and he dies, begging Walton with his last breath to finish the job. But hold on, the story isn't quite over. Walton goes into the cabin where Victor's body is, and he finds the creature itself, standing over its creator, weeping. And the creature just pours his heart out to Walton. He confesses how much he suffered, how guilty he feels. He explains that all his acts of revenge, they didn't bring him any peace. They just made him feel even more miserable. Now that his creator is dead, his whole reason for living, this awful dance of vengeance, it's finally over. There's nothing left for him. He makes one final vow. He's going to travel to the northernmost point on the entire planet and build a funeral pyre for himself. He wants to be totally destroyed so that no other curious scientist can ever find his remains and make the same mistake Victor did. And with that, he leaps off the ship onto the ice and is just carried away by the waves, disappearing into the darkness forever. Which really leaves us with the one big, haunting question at the center of this whole novel, doesn't it? Who was the real monster here? Was it the creation, abandoned by everyone and driven to violence by utter loneliness and despair? Or was it the brilliant creator, the one who played God, and then in his own horror rejected his child and refused to take any responsibility for the life he'd made?